Yep. So I guess we're live. Michael, do you want to kick off the introduction?
Sure.
What we're doing today?
So hello, everybody. I'm not sure if it should be too formal like the introduction, but this is like the third journal club discussion that we are trying to organize. We're setting up, and this time we want to talk about digital literacy. And Maha and we proposed to read the article or the strategic brief entitled Digital Literacy in Higher Education Part 2. So that's something very important to underline. As Maha, she knows the history of the Part 1 as well, and I assume you were not too happy about the Part 1, if that's correct.
No, not happy with Part 1.
And also like to give you like a bit the context of the how we came about. Maha and we met at Talix this year, and actually we didn't have actually time to talk about this, about the digital literacy. So to maybe take time online to discuss it like a little bit further. And I said to myself as well that as Maha, she's I think one of the experts also like on digital literacy and digital pedagogy. So that would be very fruitful for us and for everybody actually within the consortia to discuss it. Also like Nadine, you have worked as well a lot on digital literacy. So I think that was actually like the whole idea to share that. And also in the lights of the new Mellon Fund that we just got signed up for. And I think the digital is going to be something very important for the next 3 years within the consortia. And Jeff, please correct me if that's wrong, but that's the reading I had when I read
yes, that's true.
That's true, yeah. And I think as well, like it's very interesting because for the next conference, we're going to have Gina Singh coming. She's at the Bryn Mawr College, and she brought up like the digital competencies framework, which is also an interesting concept about digital literacy. And so I think these different components go all together to talk actually about the digital literacy. So I'm happy like to be here with everybody with you. And I'm not sure maybe about housekeeping. Maybe keep in mind like anything that's background noise, most people can hear. So maybe try to keep the background noise low. And I'm not sure anything to add, Maha, on your side so far.
No, I think we're good. I think maybe let's start with some of the warm-up questions you have. Whether or not people have read the report is, I mean, if you've read it, we'll have something in common. But even if you haven't, you probably already have your ideas of what digital literacy is and why you think it's important. And so one of the things maybe we can start off with is, you know, how do you understand digital literacy? Do you use a particular framework? Do you have your own like very brief definition of what you think it is, or ways to differentiate it from other terms that it can be confused with? And I'm also curious, as people say that, whether they have a library background or some other background, because I think that also informs the angle that we're taking as we talk about this.
Yeah, did anybody have like a kind of reaction when you were reading the text about one of the definitions that you found like in the first part? Were there some pleasing or like more attractive to you?
Okay, so I'll bite on that. So Maha, one of the questions was, what's the background? It looks like everyone, I think everyone here except you guys at UC are coming from library backgrounds, if I'm not mistaken. So it's, I guess all of our comments are going to be framed by that. One of the things I found interesting in reading this report and looking at some of the different frameworks was sort of how digital literacies and information literacies intersect, but not completely. I don't. Occasionally, in reading and hearing people talk about digital literacies, it sounds like they consider information literacy to be a subset of digital literacies. Personally, I don't think that that's accurate. I think that there's that they definitely overlap. There may be an extremely large overlap of those two areas. And again, it just sort of depends on how you define your terms. But it feels to me that there are certain aspects of information literacy, in particular, how they're framed in things like ACRL's framework, for example, that extend outside of the digital, that aren't inherent, aren't necessarily digital, talking about scholarship as conversation and other parts of the frameworks, for example. So that's interesting to me. It was interesting to me to see in this report several of the I forget how these are labeled, but at the end of the report there are the sort of viewpoints from the field, right, including Maha's article, and then a number that are coming from librarians, and that was interesting to hear some of the librarian perspectives on this. And I felt a little bit like the librarian perspectives. I didn't read all of them. I read Stephen Bell's, for example, and it felt like it was sort of missing something, and it did feel like, at least that one that I read, was not getting at the broader picture of what digital literacy is maybe about, and I guess the different kinds of tools and methods that institutions and their staff and faculty might be able to bring to the question of how to cultivate digital literacies amongst their students. It felt a little bit, I don't know, like it was just sort of missing something in the way that was being, his perspective on digital literacies was being framed. It sounded like it was a little bit too anchored in information literacy and what the library side might be able to imagine about that, without thinking about how librarians could collaborate with other staff people working on digital pedagogy, for example, with faculty, and what they could bring to that. So I'll stop there because I'm sure other people have things to comment.
But it's really valuable how you came, how you came with that, because this focus on, whoever gets to define digital literacy at the institution should be also the faculty and so on, not just us, the technologists and the faculty developers and the librarians, but also involving the faculty themselves. And that in itself will probably make sure that we get that more holistic view of what it might mean. And I think, as you were saying that, I was also thinking that faculty from different disciplines might have different foci on it, and how to integrate that into whatever institutional definitions we decide to come up with. Does anyone else want to contribute their perspective on what they think digital literacy is, or how it differs from other things like info literacy or digital skills?
Hi, this is Vanessa. Can you hear me at the moment? Yes. Oh. I'm probably not going to be talking much today because I'm pretty sick, but I wanted to say that I kind of agree with Jeff that I felt a bit weird about incorporating information literacy inside of digital literacy. And I feel like I understand wanting an umbrella term for kind of collapsing multiple literacies together and getting to that idea of students being competent and capable of integrating, information literacy and digital tools and media and all of this together. But I felt like the term digital literacy to me maybe was throwing me off. And maybe there might be a better umbrella term for the idea of bringing all of these different literacies together, from the basic ability to competently creating something that combines a bunch of technology with new information and everything. But once I got past the terminology of it, I do think that it's important to kind of do this as a large collaborative cross-institutional project, like you were saying, Maha. And I'm going to pass this off before I have a coughing fit on the mic.
Sorry, you're not feeling well. So are we, like with what Jeff and Vanessa are saying, we're thinking like a Venn diagram with some overlap between digital information and media literacy and some things that are just digital literacy that are outside of these, and that there will be aspects, and I agree, of information and media literacy that existed way before digital literacy, and they don't change because of digital. So that's, I think, just identifying what those are, and then also which we already do. So when Jeff was recently asking me, what does the UC have on its learning outcomes that relate to digital literacy, officially right now on our public website, we have nothing but information literacy through the LALT course that our librarians give, which is required of all students. But we do want to incorporate something.
It would also be useful to ask faculty that are involved in the freshman courses. What are they called? There's a committee that mainly designs courses for freshmen, like in their first years for the core curriculum. And it will be interesting to see how they intentionally incorporate digital literacies or the pedagogy of digital literacy. They do probably, but like this idea of intentionally integrating it and with the intention of digital literacy education is probably not like that
Exactly.
well framed, or the rhetoric of it is probably lost somewhere.
It's not recognized also, like the efforts they're making are. Thank you.
I have like a couple of things or thoughts that came up. I think the question really like what's missing right here, like that Jeff was asking, I think that's very important to ask. The second thing is also like do we really want to, or do we really need an umbrella term? That's something, because I sometimes have the feeling that we always try to have umbrella terms, but somehow maybe, I don't know, when you talk about media literacy or news literacy, we maybe focus on something very specific, and maybe that's more important to have like these specific terms instead of these umbrella terms. And then also about the first year experience, I thought that the Ashford University, they're doing an interesting course right here, and I think there's a link in the document on, I think they're bringing it on page, when they talk actually about what you also mentioned, Maha, they're talking about the different ways of integrating digital literacy, whatever they call it, into the humanities, business, computer sciences, but also in the general education programs or introductory courses on page, I think, page 14. And I thought that was, I think, very interesting to see how they do that at Ashford University. So they bring up like a first level, but then I'm always asking myself, to what extent do you want to teach skills or knowledge or attitude? Because while I was reading actually like the strategic brief, I asked myself, so what I actually write here, kind of learning outcomes. And in a way, at the end, I said to myself, it's actually, so my mind, I just said, actually, I want to have my students to be a certain type of user, like a web 2.0 user who's active, who's creating something. So that was kind of, for me, like kind of very helpful to frame, or like to think about digital literacy. So I'm not sure if somebody wants to, Aziz.
Yeah, a little comment. I think I'll add my voice to what my colleague said. That is, we are at the level of deconstructing the terminology, because digital literacy versus information literacy, and as you notice, the past years we've been focusing more on information literacy. Even in a conversation with one of my doctorate supervisor, I always focus on information literacy, but he's more into media and information literacy. They call it MIL, so media and information literacy. So I think personally, we need more. I need more information on understanding the term digital literacy, and where digital literacy collide or meet with information literacy, and where they don't meet. Practically, here at the library, the focus is just on information literacy and library. The Center for Learning and Teaching, they do the digital literacy. You see, I hope you see the picture. How could we collaborate? And such a meeting, I think, will highlight where we can meet, where we can collaborate, and where we can, work together on both sides. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
One of the other things that comes to mind as you say this, and as I was looking at the Ashford University course, is whether, at AUC, for example, we have an information literacy course, and is the way to go to integrate digital information literacy into that course, or to infuse it throughout the curriculum? Which I guess the answer could be both. And this infusion thing into the curriculum then becomes a question of how well prepared are faculty, how good are the faculty's own digital literacies, how do you prepare them to be able to then teach digital literacy in their field where it makes sense?
And the step after that is how you can consistently make sure that they are in fact doing that.
And not just teaching digital skills, for example,
exactly. So
without the literacies.
There's a couple of different levels for it.
One of the reasons this came up at AUC is that at first the institution was thinking, we should have all our undergraduate students do at least a blended or an online course. And I was saying, why? Is it about doing a blended or online course, or is it that you want them to be prepared for the job market to be able to do things online when they need to and to learn online. And then what you really want to do is develop their digital literacy rather than have them take an online course. Because you could take a fully online course where you just listen to lectures and do an exam, and then that's not really developing digital literacy. And that's not, it's not as helpful, I think. So that's one of the angles we were taking over here.
Which was actually, ironically, exactly what happened with the online course that teaches information literacy for graduate students. Like slides and somebody narrating and then a quiz at the end. So it wasn't very applied and it wasn't very practical.
But many times that's also like a discussion then that's focusing on the job market, like with the aim to be prepared. But what I really liked actually when I was reading like the reports on the field, or like there was this little reminders that it's not only about the job market, but there's also like things about like in a different political context, for example, that you're going to have to learn things on censorship, on algorithm access. So Maha, that's your article. There was also then the article about like privacy, about digital identity. So it's more like the personal life. And also like, so you have like these different aspects that come in, like the economic, the personal. You also have like the law aspect that's so far like still like somehow developing, like also like in different different contexts. And so then I'm saying to myself, when I hear like online course, so that's also like a very like a catchphrase 10 years ago with the MOOCs. And why not? You see, I'm saying why not, but at the same time I'm very attentive to that the teaching is not only just like we do it because for the sake of doing it, so there should be something. So that was my reaction to the readings right here. And I very much agree, and I see that also right here at AUP, that we might actually talk about digital literacy or trying to integrate digital literacy or we just say digital maybe, and I can, into the curriculum. But people might not know what that actually means, and then they're gonna say, it's going to be a very reduced way of integrating the digital without actually thinking about what we want students actually, what kind of attitude we want students to become or like to get out of the courses, which I believe are way more important than just like having like this skill.
I'm going to jump in here at this point. This is Catherine, by the way. Just one quick clarification on, I think, Nadine's point. The graduate course online that she mentioned was for academic integrity instruction, not for information literacy instruction. I'm sure that was just a that doesn't work with grammar. You misspoke. There we go. I would love if we had some more information literacy instruction for graduate students. It's one of my projects. Anyway, yeah, so as far as doing the whole digital literacy course versus information literacy course type of thing, as you know, Vanessa and I are some of the LALT instructors. We've got some rather strong feelings about this. With our course right now, we are very much struggling, and it is a perpetual struggle, information literacy, plus we try to do a bit of media literacy, not a lot, but we do some web evaluation, we do some news evaluation, those kinds of things as well, and we mention, you know, those kinds of issues, but we, you know, it would be great as an entire course. But yeah, anyway, this is, I think, one of my concerns that I have with using digital literacy as an umbrella term for information literacy and media literacy. It just gets way too big and way too unwieldy. And when we try to go for more of a skills thing, I'm strongly in the camp, particularly with digital literacy, of trying to put it throughout the curriculum and something that is more focused for upper division courses, rather than something that all freshmen have to do at a basic level. And honestly, this is our dream with information literacy as well, that we have this on the ground beginning course, but we struggle because we know students are going to apply it in different ways and be in different programs. Where information literacy changes and gets more intense and more discipline specific. So that was kind of an incoherent thought, and I apologize for that. But those were some of my reactions.
That makes a lot of sense what you're saying, in the sense that they need some kind of foundation, but they also need to keep doing it as they advance. And both, I think both information literacy and digital literacy do become discipline specific, and also because of the speed at which information and the digital change, by the time they're seniors, I think there will have been new things. So I don't know, even as early as 4 or 5 years ago, integrating Facebook into your courses was like a thing that people were trying to encourage folks to do, and it was the laggards who weren't doing it. And now the most digitally literate of us are not doing that because of the dangers of using Facebook. So it's the same tool and the same kind of social media tool, and then the attitude towards it from a digital literacy perspective has changed over the past 10 years. And so those things. And then I was also thinking back to what Michael was saying about the dimension of digital literacy. They're not about employability. I think if you guys have seen Doug Belshaw's model in the report, it's the one that defines digital literacy as 8 different literacies. And one of them is a citizenship, for example. So it's not about just employability and skills, but yeah, citizenship being one of those things. A civic, he calls it. Civic, not citizenship. But anyway, I interpret that and I think about the Arab Spring, for example, and the relevance of discussing that kind of thing with students in this context. But it would mean something else in an American context, of course, by things like the way Black Lives Matter use Twitter and things like that. And also how white supremacists have been using social media for that. And those things intersect as well with media literacy, and they intersect with information literacy in the sense of the fake news and all of that kind of thing. But there's also the digital dimension of it, which is understanding how digital algorithms do this and how people communicate online, and how that then influences our views on things and how we behave and how we act in offline settings as well. Which I don't know which faculty are prepared to teach is the thing.
I very much agree with that, you see, but I have the feeling that maybe like, especially media and communication faculty, they might be more prepared than maybe technologists or librarians, because like keeping up like with the changing information landscape is kind of it's lots of reading, and you see how there's so much things going on. And I asked actually also the question to Tara in the fake news virtual forum about that, because I think if you want to understand like how the whole digital is working today, you have to have that understanding and this big idea about the information landscape, and because you won't just like focusing then on the little thing is maybe not working. The students will not acquire that understanding, because it's all then about like that they get like this deep understanding of the whole thing, and by that hopefully they're going to get like a kind of critical and reflective thinking about it. So that was like one thing. I think also another question I had like was more like with regards to how we apply like the digital literacy into the disciplines. And I saw like that, for example, in the business, it seems that actually like the digital literacy or the information literacy or whatever you want to call it, is then actually getting that turned into data literacy, like to lots of data, you see. And then I'm saying to myself, I'm not an expert on that. See, I haven't done like any studies on that. And who would be actually ready to be able to teach that, you see?
I think Marine Tahir was trying to say something a few minutes ago. I'm not sure.
Marine, can you hear us? Or if you like, you just can use the chat box if you had a comment or a question.
Okay, yeah, we're not sure.
Okay.
Okay, what was your last question, Michael?
My question was more like with regard, like, for example, if you have like when the information literacy or digital literacy or these aspects, they come into the disciplines and how we teach it, that they take actually like a turn into like something else, like data literacy, for example. And actually how then, again, like we have that issue maybe that the faculty or like the librarians were not well prepared actually like to teach that, and how to deal with that, actually this kind of new literacy that might be important as well to transmit. Because I'm looking, for example, at the Bryn Mawr, the digital competency framework, and I can actually put this one into the chat box if I'm going to be able to manage that. And if you look at the Bryn Mawr, so there's going to be like, there's these different literacies, what they are, these different competencies. And so you're going to have like as point number 3 and 4, or the third and the fourth, you're going to have data management and data analysis, you see, in presentations. And I think that there's lots of things actually to learn, actually, on the side also like of the faculty, you see. Because in a way, if you, I don't know, see what I'm saying?
One of the things, as you were saying, that I was thinking is, shouldn't faculty in their own disciplines be aware of what kind of literacies they need in their discipline? There are some that are cross-disciplinary, things related to citizenship or whatever, that everyone needs, that maybe nobody necessarily is learning in their own discipline, or some of disciplines will and some won't. But there are some things like the data literacy of, just thinking about data literacy is a maybe the more digital form of just every discipline has their own research approaches, right? And then becoming in the research of your discipline is slightly different now with digital courses, but then the faculty need to themselves be up to date on that in their own discipline to be able to teach it. And maybe not all of them will have it, is the thing. But maybe we need to, I don't know how to do this. Like one of the discussions we were having at AUC is, should your target be that all of your faculty have a certain level of digital literacy, or should it be that you have X% of your faculty and X% of your courses have that, and then just make sure that students get at least a particular foundation at different levels, and then not, probably very difficult for faculty who aren't into technology at all, who have been here for like 20 or 30 years, to come and tell them, well, hey, you're out of date, let's teach you from the beginning. I think that's probably counterproductive.
But maybe the argument like from the traditional faculty might be that the data analysis and the interpretation of data today has not changed since 20 years ago. You see, they're gonna look at information or data, and they're gonna still see maybe that they gotta say the analysis and the interpretation is gonna be the same. The only thing that has actually changed right now is maybe the format that is right now in the digital, you see, and maybe the collection of data maybe has, or the management has changed.
Please, if you allow me, I want to highlight or comment on the perception of librarian, from the perspective of faculty member. They always look at us as supporter to their academic mission. We're helping their student. We're supporting their research, educational. To my knowledge, they rarely look at us as digital supporter. So I know that digital literacy and information literacy, they don't compete. They, they're together for one purpose. But looking at the ACRL literature, there is also a little literature on defining digital literacy. They always focus on information literacy, but very, very rarely where they would highlight or say that it's part of the mission. So how would we change the question? How would we change our perception? An example, teaching, for example, reference or bibliographical tool such as Zotero or Mendeley, etc. When our team do this, it's purely computer, it's digital. it's, you know, having students work on computers, having faculty member also learn on the ABCs of these things. But this is digital literacy. So again, the question, how would we change our, you know, teach it and services so that faculty member can look at us as servicing both digital literacy and information literacy. Thank you.
And then,
So I think thinking about kind of the disciplinarity of digital literacy is interesting. I noticed they had kind of a little section on the different disciplines and how digital literacy differs across them. And I thought it was interesting what they included, which was humanities, business, computer science, and then introductory courses in general education. Because I think there are, in every discipline, there's some aspects of digital connection that are needed in order to become proficient. I'm thinking of when I was studying psychology, and one of the stats courses I took was essentially an introduction to using the common statistical package and software that was used in psychology. So even though it was framed as a statistics course, it was mostly just how to use this software and make sure that you understood what was happening. And in order to do that, you needed computer skills. Or within physics, it's very common for everyone in physics to just have to know how to program because they're running and creating computer programs or creating papers using LaTeX rather than Word. And these digital skills in some disciplines, it's just kind of assumed that students will put in their own time on the side in order to learn them. And there isn't always institutional support for them. I know that in some areas, librarians pick up these skills to get better integration into the disciplines and provide that support if they don't see the support anywhere else. So I think in some ways that kind of information literacy, digital literacy blurring means that librarians take on a lot of that digital support for things that are kind of not necessarily dropped, but just not seen as integral to a discipline by some of the faculty. That said, I think in some disciplines or in some cases specific faculty will do their best to make sure that these skills do get integrated into a course. And in some ways, I think it kind of comes down to not only the institution, but also the department, looking at what skills are viewed as vital for a degree or a department and how they're integrated into the curriculum long term. And in some cases, they might view foundational digital skills that way. In some cases, they might look at specific digital skills that are useful for a discipline. And in some cases, they might decide that other content-focused skills are more important and prioritize those first. Because in the end, we're all working with time limits. It's not just, we struggle with it on a single course level. And I can't imagine if within the library we had to integrate an entire degree and try and fit all of the information in. I mean, we have so much trouble fitting. I can see why that's a struggle.
And let me just jump in on that really quick as well. This is Catherine. I've found I want to agree with what Vanessa just said about the librarians picking up some of the slack on digital literacy things and how that blurring can actually be really helpful for us. Outreach to science programs is always one of the biggest challenges for a librarian. And I have in graduate programs, I've gotten a lot of traction and gotten a lot of invitations into science classes because I teach just digital programs like Zotero, like citation management, and they're all really interested in those. And it's an easy way for me to say, yeah, sure, I will come and teach this for you and your students. But can I have a little bit of extra time to also talk about these information literacy things as well? And so they usually give that to me, and that's an easy way for them to, invite me back and say, we really liked your session, come do it again for next semester. So yeah, I'm just emphasizing that point with an example. And I'm going to mute us now so that you don't have to listen to the call.
I thought maybe Jeff, you wanted to say something maybe, but before, is that correct? No. Otherwise, I might have, just like on the, for me, like there's two things, like the, I heard like many times right now, like using Zotero librarian perspective, or like skills. This is something I'm interested actually, like also like the perspective outside from the librarian. So that's something important for me. And also like then the more like the cognitive and the affective level of teaching, like the understanding and like the values that come along, because I believe that's very important, because the Zotero probably like in 5 years, maybe on 10 years, it's not going to be there anymore. And when I'm teaching, I'm always thinking about more like this concept teaching. And yeah, so these were like some thoughts on what you were saying, Vanessa and Catherine. But maybe Jeff.
I did want to jump on one thing that I think it was Vanessa that was mentioning this. I liked the example of like in physics, for example, physics students having to sort of learn LaTeX on their own. It's not part of the discipline per se. LaTeX is basically a sort of markup language for writing in mathematics. And I remember, as a physics major, I remember even a long time ago, it was a similar issue. That's probably the case as well today, where you've got a skill like that has to do with sort of how you manipulate, how you communicate within your discipline. But learning that skill actually doesn't, it's not something that the disciplinary experts, the physicists, are in their classroom for the most part teaching. I don't know how much that's changed today, but it's an example where there's the skill that's required for manipulating the materials in your discipline, but it's not actually part of the discipline, and it has to do with how you structure, how you manage your communications in that discipline. And I think that's relevant as like one very specific example where there's this fuzzy area of a skill that's necessary for acting, succeeding in that discipline, that is not part of the disciplinary expertise per se. And some of the faculty in that discipline will actually, push that away and say that that's not my responsibility to teach students that. Who picks up that responsibility? It's not necessarily, librarians, but it's interesting that I think there's an opportunity there, there's a need there for some kind of structure to support the mastery of those kinds of skills, even if it's not a librarian or an instructional technologist teaching that, but maybe there's some kind of institutional support for students to pick up those skills, providing opportunities for learning LaTeX in this case.
I have a comment on that, because I think when we talk about those specific examples, I think it's more about a specific digital skill. And if you promote a lifelong type of digital literacy, then the student student or faculty or whoever, then will be able to recognize which of these things they need to learn and figure out how to learn it. They won't necessarily, I think, need time to be taken out of class for that, or they might the computer science club or the history association or whatever extracurricular activities can then organize sessions on it if students need it. Yeah. But a lot of these things like Zotero, for example, once you've learned one of them, if it changes, there's a new one, there's Mendeley, there's whatever else, you figured out the idea of it, and then you can, just the concept, just knowing that there's such a thing as reference management, and then figuring out a way to use a different one is easy. I think the beginning phase is just recognizing that such a thing exists, how it's going to empower you or support you, then deciding to invest the time in learning it. And one of the funny things about reference management systems, and I asked this recently, is that I used one throughout my PhD, and then after I finished my PhD, I stopped using it. And a lot of people do that, which is very interesting because it's very useful when you're doing your PhD, and I'm not really sure what happens afterwards. But yeah, it's a decision you make after you know what's there. So it's different to not know that something exists versus to know that it exists and then to decide whether or not you're going to use it. I'm wondering if Livia, Yvette, and there's quite a few people who are here who haven't spoken up, but if Jeff wants to respond to that, and then
I'll come back to something if anyone wants to jump in, that's fine.
I'm good going.
So anyone interrupt me, please, if anyone wants to jump in. But I really liked what Maha just said about the lifelong learning part of digital literacy. I think actually one thing that I really liked about this NMC brief was that it brought out this idea that at the core of digital literacy is this idea of adaptability. And I think, I'm not sure what language they used in the report, but it was talking about digital literacy as sort of lifelong learning for a digital age, and having this capacity to adapt to new, well, to changed and constantly changing digital environments, right? So where the key idea is that one of the things that the digital environment brings is this aspect of change, constant and increasingly rapid change. And so digital literacy is part of cultivating the ability of students to adapt to that change and to be able to continue going forward to create effectively and critically, but within this changing environment, and being able to keep their footing and adapt to new environments that digital media and tools create. And but anyway, digital literacy as lifelong learning for this digital environment. And so I agree with Maha, what you were just saying about the maybe what's important here is not like teaching someone that skill, LaTeX for the physicist, for example, but finding ways to cultivate that ability to and that disposition to be able to learn things effectively on their own and evaluate critically what they need to learn and how to learn it.
I want to jump in here. Again, this is Catherine, and respond to a couple of these really good points that have been being made. Michael was talking about prioritizing teaching concepts over teaching a particular skill, which I think over the long term, and you definitely, if you're teaching a skill, you definitely want to include those kinds of concepts as well. And Maha was talking about the idea of letting students learn for themselves, which is also something that we really want to support and cultivate. But I also think that we need to, and I think that those are great long-term goals, but I also think that we need to face some realities that a lot of our students are not there at this point. At least I can speak from my own personal experience. And I don't think that we should drop those students and not provide, the support for them of, taking their hand, showing them a skill, showing them it's not really difficult to use this particular program. They get more familiar with it, and we can, also show them here's how you can keep learning on this over time. So, for example, I have a lot of students. I have a lot of graduate students who I, just as a small example, I have a lot of graduate students who are very unfamiliar with technology in general. I can have students who are unfamiliar, who struggle with very basic things like checking their email when they come to me for a citation management workshop. And a lot of them are returning to school after a long time away. A lot of them, as Maha mentioned in her really excellent section in this report that we read, a lot of them are women who just have had less technological access or less technological support, or so I don't think that minimizing teaching someone a skill. When I encourage students to use citation management, I try to, and I tell them about it because they don't know about it. And I show them how I can send them to a few guides and show them how they can learn it online. There's a lot of students who are like, that's great, but I really want to come to your class so that you can show me how. And I don't think that is necessarily a bad thing. I think that we need to support them in their process wherever they are, and that hopefully we can get them up to a point where they can take off and learn on their own. Sorry, I ran on there a bit.
I've maybe and then Maha, we wanted also to talk a bit about the maybe more like about what we can do within AMICAL with regard to digital literacy. Is that like a conversation we want to go in that direction now? What do you think? because I believe that it might be maybe very interesting also to see what's going on, maybe on AMICAL, like in general, like about the digital literacy, but also like about maybe what we can do actually right here to support that.
Yeah, I think that sounds like it would be a good, interesting conversation to go into. And I'm just going to say what I just typed back to Catherine, is that I agree, you need to give them some kind of foundation before they'll learn on their own. So it's not a dismissal of the need to support students, but rather that you support them up to a point that will help them then transfer and be able to learn on their own eventually, but not to assume that they can do that. Not because the skills and the literacy is also the skills they would learn. They could learn a skill on their own, but the literacy needs support and mentoring, because to just think about these things critically. But back to what Michael was saying, is that I'd be interested to hear what people's thoughts are on how AMICAL as a consortium can support digital literacies across our institutions. I mean, the very obvious kind of thing that I think about is that if we are all working toward digital literacies in a particular way that has some common aspects, I'm sure there will be some local aspects, but if there are some common aspects, we can do quite a bit in terms of professional development and supporting each other, I think. I wonder what other thoughts people have.
So Nadine and Michael in particular, we've been working with Ivana and a few other people, their AMICAL colleagues, about sort of surveying, finding out how different institutions and the faculty at our institutions perceive and put resources towards digital literacies. So should we talk just briefly about sort of what we've been working on with that? Maybe discuss what we might be able to do further with that or better with that. So one of the projects. Did you want to say something?
No, Maha was telling me, are you going to talk about it? I was like, no, Jeff's got it.
Well, I'll start it off, and then you can fill in.
He's taking the lead.
Interrupt me when I go off the rails. So at Talix, there was a discussion group that's around digital literacies that sort of gave birth to a couple of different projects that have been being worked on. And one of the projects that I've been more actively involved in has been developing a sort of inventory of what did we call this? Inventory of institutional statements and human resources supporting digital literacies. So basically looking, we're going to be sending out this survey essentially to the institutions of the consortium to find out how their institutions position themselves, position the institution and their curriculum in terms of digital literacy. So for example, in your general education programs, are there statements specifically about digital literacies and how digital literacies need to be incorporated as learning outcomes in your courses in the general education program or elsewhere? So statements at the institutional level like that, but also what kind of human resources your institutions are putting towards digital literacy, digital pedagogy, or anything related to that. So what's the institutional positioning towards developing digital literacies across students and faculty and staff? And then there's another group that came out of that discussion at Talix as well, that's looking at faculty perceptions. So I think a little bit later, there's another survey that will be sent out to gather faculty perceptions of digital literacy, how they define it, how they look at digital literacies, how they teach it. So there's a couple different groups that are working on those projects. I have a question about sort of what we, in the context of the first project I mentioned, sort of getting a feel for how our institutions position themselves regarding digital literacy. I have a question about what we might be able to do, how we can use this NMC brief in that context. How is this useful in framing that questionnaire and reaching out to our institutions? Maybe in reaching out to academic leadership at our institutions. So I have a question I wanted to sort of develop for the group to talk about, but maybe Nadine, I don't know if you want to jump in or Michael and add other details about what we've been working on.
No, I actually think you did that pretty comprehensively. But right now, just when listening to you talk about it again, like it's just made me think that we were specifically thinking about how faculty are teaching this, and this is not particularly that representative of an entire institution, which is why I think a good idea is to bring in staff ideas or staff reflections or feedback about this in particular, like how they perceive their jobs. I mean, do jobs generally like have an element of digital literacy in them, or is it like done intentionally, or is it just, you know, happening? So I think it will be interesting to look at that separately, probably not interweaving it with the faculty part, because that would just make it really grow a lot, and we won't really be able to do that much with it in a short period of time if we sort of get really ambitious with it. But I think this is something we might want to keep in mind for that, because support staff work with faculty and support them in working on these things.
I think one of the, coming back to the survey, like from the institution, what's going on, I think the challenge, I think, is when we ask about what digital literacy wise goes on in institution, the question is what people understand by when they fill out the questionnaire, what it is. So maybe they're, and using like maybe the, I think either we can have like a definition of what we believe that digital literacy should be, or we ask actually like the participants which of the ones they choose, you see, which they believe, and then they're gonna fill out the survey. But I think that's gonna be the.
Or you could do something similar to that table, which is break it down into different things and see if people think these are part of it. So it's not that we're asking them to subscribe to a particular definition of digital literacy, but rather to say which of these dimensions of digital literacy, which not all the definitions have all the dimensions, and to see which of these they think are important or they're worth including.
Yeah. That could be also nice. It's the page 5 table, is it? At the button that you've done.
Is it page 2? Hang on, let me check.
Yeah, I think that's what she's talking about.
Yeah. Just to be on the same page.
Yeah, bottom of page 5, yeah. We could just break these down into what they are. It's, by the way, it's not a perfect table because the editors of the report, I had a few other things and the editors thought these were the ones that were most important. So we can decide if there's something else that we want to include that isn't there. I think most of them are there. Yeah, just give people the opportunity to decide.
Also, I think it's a good idea to inventory and find out what's happening now, because any efforts to develop something or to offer support needs to keep in mind what is happening currently at these institutions and to be able to also level the playing ground moving up. So I think that's also really important, or like a very big goal in terms of improving digital literacies across institutions.
And also within the curriculum, I believe, because if you want to do something coherent, you want to see what's going on the first year and second year, also like maybe discipline, how you can actually develop that together. Because I don't have like lots of experience on that, but I believe that, I'm not sure, Maha, or if you, because you're teaching a little bit digital literacy, I guess.
Yeah.
So what actually are your priorities right now for like second or third or first year? Also Nadine, I'm not sure. You see, I don't have a feel for that for the moment. I've seen at Talix that many people, they ask students to do podcasts, to do wikis, to do kind of mapping things. So these are kind of projects, and I think project-driven teaching is and learning is good. But then I'm saying to so what's, I'm coming always from the learning outcome side, saying, so what do we want to achieve right here?
I was just thinking, as you're saying that, there's also a couple of things to think about when we're asking people. There's one thing to believe that something is important, another thing to be able to teach it, and another thing to be able to teach it critically. So you could think that something's important, but you're not teaching it, or you know that you're teaching it, but you're not teaching it critically. Like I think there are some things I try to teach and they just get put in the back burner because other things take priority. So I know I'm not succeeding at teaching them, for example, and I prioritize other things. I know you could teach someone how to create a podcast and they learn the skill, but they don't learn about audiences, or, you know what I mean? Like they could just learn the technical skill of putting their voice on a thing and editing the audio, but not necessarily of making it a valuable resource for other people, for example. So,
which is why I think a very important thing to think about when thinking about digital literacy is the information with which the students are going to create that product at the end with that skill. So for example, creating, I don't know, an online course or presenting or going through a conference, like they need information about Creative Commons and open educational resources and all that to be able to create technically that product that is gonna, like in podcasts or anything, like you can apply this particular thought to anything. So it's taking a step back from skills and just going through the mental process that students need to go through first, and then the kinds of information they need, the resources they need, and then finally incorporating that skill or using that skill to create a product eventually.
Which might deter people from doing things altogether is the problem.
It's just making it
like
a bit more
sometimes you say,
complicated.
yeah, whereas you also want to keep it easy. So it's...
I think I don't have any further question. We're coming almost to an end right now. It's almost 11 o'clock. Any final thoughts from, I don't know, anybody? Anything that, or anything that we want to take it further, like the discussion right here? I think it's very important to talk about. I definitely believe that the digital is something very new in the last 20 years that popped up everywhere. I still believe that we are kind of right here in a period of transition, that it's like we are trying to figure out like a couple of things and it's not happening from one day to the other, more like things are changing a lot. So, I definitely think that this discussion about the digital is very important. So to continue, I hope. And I know that Nadine, we're going to talk at the conference maybe about it. That's correct. There's going to be a discussion, I think, a birds of feather discussion. And I think Gina Cizeng, she's going to do a keynote on digital literacy, and the second keynote speaker as well, Jeff. Is that correct?
Right. Both of the keynotes are going to be speaking on topics that relate to digital literacies, but from very different perspectives.
Okay.
So one is, I don't know, I don't want to go into the details about it now, but it's going to be an interesting, I think there'll be an interesting sort of, not opposition necessarily, but definitely differing points of view that I think will give rise to some lively discussion.
Okay, here we go.
Okay, before we close out, let me, as one of the, let me just say thank you very much to Michael and Maha. We're really thrilled that, you know, Journal Club is getting some new leaders and you guys are picking your articles, and we're really happy about that. So yay, I think I really enjoyed this discussion. Thank you guys so much, and I do look forward to talking about it more. Before we close out really quick, let me mention something about the May Journal Club, which is coming up very, very soon, because we are having an in-person session at the annual conference, which will be, I believe, Saturday of the conference on the 5th of May. And we have posted, as part of the description on the schedule, the article will be Search Strategy Development in a Flipped Library Classroom, a student-focused assessment, which we thought would prompt some interesting conversations here. And we will post it. We didn't want to get in the way or confuse people about this month's discussion, but either go to AMICAL Connect so that people can get reading on the next article. So yeah, we're really looking forward to that too. And again, thank you very much, Maha and Michael. And as always, thanks, Alex, for helping us have these online discussions.